developed in-house by the state.
I'm sorry?
The science and social studies standards, those are not Common Core standards. Does the bill impact them?
The bill is going to talk about, ultimately it's going to talk about standards that have been tested and proven elsewhere. I'm not aware of where the Ohio's science standards stand, but I believe that they were also informed by the national ones that have been attempted. There are new generation science standards that have come out. As you know, Ohio's Common Core standards have been relabeled Ohio's New Learning Standards, even though they came from the Common Core Initiative. So I've kind of changed in my job a little bit. I scrutinize things a little more. I try to make sure I can read through the labels that are sometimes put on things, because you never know until you trust but verify. And so we want to make sure that, again, Ohio is in the driver's seat on this process, and I think that this bill will help in that process.
So what are the standards that are going to take the place? So the repeal comes in, what are the standards coming in?
Well, we're looking at other states that have had proven standards. One good example that we've looked at closely is Massachusetts. Massachusetts, prior to Common Core, had the #1 standards in the nation. They had gone from a kind of, I won't say mediocre, but a modestly performing state to tops in the nation. One of the questions that logically comes up is, why would they go to a Common Core when they had the best standards in the nation? The answer is a lot of federal money. I think that's really what has affected the process here. States that were financially in distress in the wake of the Great Recession, or during the Great Recession, were in desperate need of money. And the federal government and Gates Foundation and others were there with the checkbook to be able to encourage people. And there were also waivers from No Child Left Behind, which were also provided another incentive. So when you take federal leverage and marry it with federal dollars, a lot of people's decisions are affected, and I think that was the case in Massachusetts. What we'd like to do, and one of the things I've said from the inception, is we don't, it's not a good idea to roll out to 50 states something, or 45, that's never been tested. That is the case with the Common Core state standards, and we want to look at standards that are tested, proven, and effective, so that Ohio has something that they can rely on and have some, it's all about data, good data on what has worked.
So those new standards are going to be spelled out in the bill?
Yes.
And then what does this mean for teachers who are prepared to go based on the Common Core standards this fall?
Yeah. Again, I'm not prepared to answer all because we're continuing to get the final version of the bill, and that's something that we're going to have to discuss. But again, I think it's going to be a change, but I think it's going to be a change in the right direction, because as we discussed, whether it is the federalism aspect that Representative Huffman talked about, whether it is the inferior quality of the standards relative to the ones that we would like to select. We agree that standards are important. We want them to be the best in the nation, and we want them to be standards that have been tested and proven. So yes, it will represent a change. I think school districts are undergoing change right now, and a lot of the concern that they have is the excessive testing, the cost of implementation. I know in Stark County alone it was $1 million in additional administrative costs for the Common Core State Standards Initiative. So there are a lot of concerns that haven't been allayed, that are real and are present, and I think now is an appropriate time for us to try to address those as best we can, and I think House Bill 597 will assist in that process. I'm sorry to take your team here.
So I guess what I'm saying is, let's say this bill doesn't pass by the time school starts, and teachers are starting their curriculum based on Common Core standards. Yeah. Once this bill passes and it goes into effect, do they stop what they're doing and start the new standards, or will this school year go and then starting next school year?
As a practical matter, this bill has to pass the House, the Senate, and be signed by the governor, and then it's 90 days before it's effective. So it can't pass before the school starts.
Right, and the other thing is there's a process for these standards whereby hearings will be held in addition to this, and there'll be time. We'll recognize what the calendar is and what the obligations are and what the testing obligations are. That's one of the things that we're working out in conjunction with LSC, and we will, we'll have more answers as the bill rolls out, and certainly address the concerns that people raise. And that's what the hearings are all about as well, to hear the concerns that people have and hopefully to address those.
Following up on Andy's question, one of the concerns I've heard from supporters of Common Core, including some of your colleagues, is that teachers and school districts have spent 4 years now getting ready for this moment where they will fully implement Common Core, and changing it now or eliminating it will just pull the rug out from under them and cause even more chaos. What is your response to that?
Well, nobody likes chaos. Nobody likes chaos, but nobody, on the other hand, if we've identified that we're going down the wrong track, you don't continue off the cliff. I think you try to come up with a solution. I think You know, Ohio's kind of been, to continue that analogy, been tied to the railroad tracks here on this mission, and I think we were not fully there. But you know, often people will say to you, "Well, we can't stop now. We're already down the road." Well, if you're going down the wrong road, I think you do need to stop, and you need to revise course, and you need to put in place, again, as I said, something that is much more likely to succeed. We know that, you know, nothing fails like the federal government, and when the federal government is in charge of things like this, the notion is, even Gates himself admits it, we won't know for 10 years whether it worked. I want standards that we know have worked. And I think so if we, you know, while I have empathy for teachers, my wife is a Spanish teacher, as a matter of fact, she's been involved in some of the, you know, the teacher improvement efforts that have been underway as part of this. So I have empathy, and I've got a lot of teachers in my district. I would just like for those teachers to feel like they're not merely in the process of becoming testing administrators. One of the comments I hear is that all the joy has been taken out of teaching, and I also hear that there's not going to be time for music and art and some of those other things because we're so aggressively moving to 7 tests to try to satisfy the federal folks that want the data. This isn't necessarily about data, it's about students and learning and helping them to have a positive experience and helping the teachers to enjoy what they're doing and not hate what they're doing. One of the things you'd be maybe not surprised to hear is how many teachers are leaving the profession because of Common Core.
Could you?
And I just want to address a little bit Jim's question. You know, society is always changing. There's an evolution, and nothing reflects that in my mind more than what we do in terms of education. You know, 100 years ago, all the kids in the town went to one schoolhouse, and one teacher taught them all the subjects. And we realize now today that kids learn differently in different environments. Some kids who failed miserably in the best schools did really well when they started learning online. And some kids, when they were in a school of 2,000 in high school, did really bad until they got into a smaller school. The standards are always going to evolve. And if someone said, well, gee, I started learning this 4 years ago and we're starting to implement it, something new is always coming down the track in education. Whether we're learning from iPads now, whether we're, you know, are the things that we have to require. And so I think there's obviously folks have to rely on what the mandates are. But as we go forward, there is always going to be change in education. And especially if you step back and say, wow, we made a bad decision 4 years ago. You know, when Elizabeth Dole thought it was a great idea for everybody to drive 55 miles per hour, we figured out after a year or so that was a really bad idea. And we turned it over to the states, and everybody has their own speed limits now. Now that's a very simple example, but it really is what this is about. Even though it looks good on a piece of paper or a computer program in Seattle, Washington, or Washington, D.C., that doesn't mean it works great in Jackson Center, Ohio, or Chillicothe, or downtown Cleveland.
Can you outline